A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to HJN Season 5. So, we are back at it once again with, of course, plenty more franchises worth talking about. Such unique examples that I have in the works for the immediate future, at least in the next coming weeks, will include things like Doom, SpongeBob, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Indiana Jones, and Astro Boy. But of course, we aren't going to be talking about any of those for now. We of course have number 2932, in which the franchise in question will be about Street Fighter. Yeah, so much like when I talked about Mortal Kombat a little while ago, Street Fighter is without a doubt one of the most popular, if not the best, fighting game franchises. Much like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter got itself a big repetition throughout the early 90s. Perhaps the real big difference, though, is that it wasn't slammed by the government in the form of a massive ban from the marketplace. All because Mortal Kombat was a little too violent and gory. The thing is, though, is that Street Fighter was put together by Capcom, a series in which that was very well notable was, of course, made by Capcom. And Capcom themselves have already had a big reputation for Mega Man, DuckTales, alongside many other video game franchises throughout the 80s. And up until the point in which that the first Street Fighter game came around, this is pretty much not something that not many people know about, particularly because it wasn't very big. It did come around in the form of an arcade machine by 1988, and within a year or so would come around in the form of some computer ports and even a console port to the CD add-on of the TurboGrafx 16, a 16-bit console that does predate the likes of Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, alongside many other 16-bit consoles at the time. But of course, apart from being rather elusive and well hidden from the massive successes of both the Genesis and Super Nintendo, the TurboGrafx 16 did of course require the usage of a special CD add-on, just so you can have a console variable of the first Street Fighter game. Of course, it was even notable for having a title change for some reason. Fighting Street was apparently what they called it. How and why this came to be is a bit of a mystery, but all of us can agree that the first Street Fighter game kinda deserved a little more ambiance in comparison to the enormous lineage that spawned because of the massive success of Street Fighter 2. The second game alone is something that almost everybody talks about, whereas the first game might as well be nothing. That's almost like if people were to put Toy Story down way below the eyes in the list that the second film apparently happens to have a much broader appearance in the marketplace or elsewhere. But we both know that 1 and 2 have gotten a lot of box office and critical reception over the years, and wouldn't you think that Street Fighter could deserve the very same sort of thing? Either way you look at it though, let's just go on ahead and marathon through the likes of Street Fighter characters. You have Ryu, Guile, Blanka, Dawson, Ken, and a good variety of others. In fact, as the sequels went on, much like with the sequels in Mortal Kombat, they of course would expand their coverage and allow for many more characters to show up. There would even come around a time in Street Fighter 6 in which that you create your own character in a nice big world in which that you explore throughout the storyline. That is of course the most recent title in the franchise. The most recent mainline sequel, Part 6, which came out in 2023, was actually pretty well made for what it was. And I will say that with the other Street Fighter games, haven't experienced much of 3, 4, though I did try out 5 for some time, as well as the Championship Edition, which it came out in 2020 for the most part, but the Championship Edition would come around about 2 years later, and both versions actually do pretty good. Effective at telling a story, whether it be from the original artistic drawn still image cutscenes, or even the animated cutscenes that go in line with the in-game graphics. Yeah, I don't know why they included 2 different styles for storylines. Either way, they did pretty well with the 5th game, and with the 6th game, I ultimately didn't make it all that far, but from what I at least understand, it goes from the start point in which that you have your own in-game avatar, and in my case, when I played the game for the first time, it was actually pretty impressive. They gave you the option firsthand to use Capcom's well-known classic control system, as well as a modernized control system, which did allow you to operate in a similar way as to how the latest Mortal Kombat installments would do. Of course, we know that having up is primarily the method of jumping in fighting games like this. Even if they took on a bit of a more 3D aesthetic to them, they still had the urge to put together an up for jump buttons, and with that kind of control function, it's practically default. Even in other fighting games like this, we happen to see this sort of control function in a similar manner. Either way you look at it though, Street Fighter is still a bit of a series of events. Events that most people still clamor around, even if some of them just happen to not be as good as what others have been so far. And from my experience though, Part 6 is uniquely challenging in its own right, and maybe still worth playing. It's probably the only real big installment on the PS5, but then again, knowing that you can probably port PS4, 3, and 2 and 1 titles, even PS Vita and PSP titles have been ported on the most modern of console software. I guess you could say that whether it be through special emulation techniques or unique programming, it's pretty much up to you, but either way, I'm still impressed that they were able to do all this for the PlayStation Store or otherwise. But all my experiences in Street Fighter though, I still will at least say they are impressively written fighting games, and the memorable cast of characters, especially Ryu, Ken, Blanca, and of course, Zangief. That is, of course, just to name a few, because the whole cast in Part 6 is also just as huge. They do have a lot of newer characters as well. One person by the name of Luke. No joke. So you could say Part 6 really expanded the coverage and did allow for more characters to come around. And there's even a method in which that you can actually train from certain characters. I mean, Luke has his own fighting style, Chun-Li has her own fighting style, and many of the other characters have much of the same sort of thing. A new fighting style for you to learn.